essentially, if you looked at what business schools were doing, and universities that own these business schools were doing, they were giving the small business owners or future entrepreneurs education that was really designed for people who wanted to go and work in large companies. In other words, what we're doing is we're destroying entrepreneurship by giving education in strategy made simple. So you have strategy for the big boys, big fat books, and then you have strategy for the little boys, small thin books. The small thin books are sponsored by banks, the big fat books are sold for 30 or 40 pounds. Now, you know, it's really doing damage, and that's why I think on the whole you find very few MBA programs in the world from which real businesses have come out. Yes, Pizza Hut, maybe McDonald's, maybe Pizza Land, Pizza Express, etc., and some good companies. But before that, if you look underneath, you'll find those MBA programs, maybe the engineers went to work there, and they have had experience as engineers, worked in real companies, and then done an MBA, and then come out and done a business. That's the ecosystem of MIT and Boston and Harvard and so forth. So what are we actually doing? What education are we providing? When I came to Cambridge and started to work in this environment, question I asked my bosses who employed me, said, what's my job here? And they said, change the culture. Okay, I said, by which Friday do you want this to happen? Okay, so I took a more humble attitude, which is to say, let me try and spread the spirit of enterprise. And through this spirit of enterprise spreading, those PhDs, those postdocs, those academics that wish to take the entrepreneurial journey, we will equip them and enable them to go forward. That's where we're starting from. The second side of it is in listening to the entrepreneurial experiences of the academics, of the professors, of the postdocs, of the people around, what you find is they absolutely do not follow the textbook model of entrepreneurship and business. So the early days of understanding this is if you have a business idea, you go off and write a business plan, you come back and you present it. I think Camille described 3 barrels of paperwork. You know, he's absolutely right. That is the disaster. And then you go off and start the company, get the lead. No, actually, in high-tech, disruptive technology-based businesses, that is not the first thing you do is you figure out who owns the intellectual property. You have negotiations with lawyers, you tie that down, then you go find some team members who can understand the commercialization of this thing, and you start to form that. Then you try to convert technology speak into normal people's language, and you try to communicate that, the so-called elevator pitch. It's a very different starting position. And only the good stuff will go. And looking at what really is successful in Cambridge, to be honest, it is the stuff that is possible to win a Nobel Prize, which makes the really big companies. The trivial technology gets you reasonable companies, but the really big science gets you the big companies. And the best example I have of that is Cesar Milstein's work that got him a Nobel Prize for monoclonal antibodies, which formed Cambridge Antibodies CAT, and it was acquired by AstraZeneca recently. And if you look back on some of these things, it's a really good deep science that brings the companies. Cambridge is also much slower than Silicon Valley because on the whole, it is science-based companies which take much longer in gestation than do the high-tech companies which are consumer-based or internet companies. So we have deep tech, deep science, long incubation companies as the general principle around Cambridge. So the entrepreneurs cycle through because by the time it comes to commercialization, it is much more of a product company and better left with other people to commercialize. Very few of the science entrepreneurs have stayed with the company right the way through. So disruptive-based technology, quite different from non-disruptive, which is the trading mentality. So I don't know if Poland is still on or was ever on the Silk Road, but I suspect it was. Say if it was on the Silk Road, that's at least 8,000 years of trading experience that's sitting somewhere in Poland on the way to its neighboring countries in Europe. So that's just buying and selling, that's arbitrage, that's a different kind of business exposure. But the high-tech scientific base, which is what the academics are interested in, where there is disruption, it's a different type of understanding of entrepreneurial competence. So that was one aspect. And it seemed to me that all of this was happening within an ecosystem. There seemed to be people who knew people that were making things happen, that knew which lawyer knows most about microprocessors or about DNA or about biotech or bioinformatics and so on. And that little expertise, the pathways to expertise, seemed to be sitting in the tacit knowledge within the environment. It was not sitting on the internet, on Google search, it was not sitting in textbooks. So how do you make something happen? You have to drill out the tacit knowledge. Second part of it, certainly going back to SME policy, infrastructure and quantitative analysis, this is the zone of economists and geographers. And it's about policy frameworks for fair trading, for tax, fiscal policy, establishing stock markets, bank rates and so on. It does almost nothing at the micro level to inspire because it doesn't deal with the so-called softer issues. Scientists are very uncomfortable with soft issues because we don't have theories for them, not adequately explained. It's partly to do with the brain, partly to do with the heart, partly to do with the spirit, the culture, the religion. These things don't work. It can't be explained by the laws of gravity, therefore it can't be right. But I have to tell you, in entrepreneurship and actually making a cultural difference within a nation, the soft issues are hugely important. You know that. You've all got children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and you see it every day in family life. So entrepreneurship for me is very exciting because the nature of the people that can gather is vibrant. It's also much bigger ambition, frankly, than talking about SME. You imagine I hope I offend nobody here, but the car rental companies, Hertz and Avis, as a consumer, it sends me very different messages. Hertz car rental says, we're number one, right? There's an ambition. Poor old guys at Avis say, we try harder. We never quite get there. Well, it's not true. They're a good company. But what's the message it's sending out? What message do we send out as policymakers, academics and investors if we say we want to foster a small business mentality in you? You work hard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, go on, do it, you know, so that you can have a small business. Really inspiring. Okay. So SME policy is okay for politicians, it's not okay for you and me, because it doesn't do anything for the society really. We want bigger ambition for our people. They are talented, they're human beings. Why put them in a small box? So SME policy, just because I'm interested in history, if you go back far enough, John Ruskin's work, which then influenced Adam Smith, then he had a battle with Karl Marx. If you find traces of the work in Mahatma Gandhi, which is about individual capability and individual rights and individuals doing things for themselves. So I suspect the SME thing came from that level of thinking. I don't think they were saying think small, I think they were thinking being independent and being free from the tyranny, if you like, of this kind of large-scale mentality. And then Schumacher's work in 1970, 77 I think to be precise, he wrote this amazing book, Small is Beautiful, which is Economics as if People Matter. It was a breakthrough work. I never thought I would be saying thank you to Mrs. Thatcher. My political leanings are not that far to the right. I never imagined it, but my goodness me, the impact of her, you know, going for privatization, the sheer destruction of large-scale industries meant, of course, that people were suddenly made redundant, had to go find jobs and make jobs for themselves. And 20 years later, they are the role models for their sons and daughters. You know, my father runs a company, employs 85 people. He's an engineer. My mother and father are in business together, my uncle or whatever. That whole thing changed completely. So from being seen as crooks, entrepreneurs, now seen as respectable middle-class people doing things, you know, going to the golf course as they do, with the bigger cars, shinier houses, all doing well, and on the whole more socially accepted. In fact, on the business of social acceptance, just two quick stories. When I first arrived in Cambridge, I was looking to see how we would teach entrepreneurship in the science departments, in chemistry, physics, chemical engineering, material science, etc., not the MBA program. It was not my target. My target was the science departments. And I went to see 3 very senior professors in chemistry. And we went to what's called the senior common room, nice medieval room with wood paneling, a bit like, no wood paneling. And I gave them my pitch. About 5 minutes later, one elderly professor looks at the elderly professor and says, well, I suppose if our postdocs don't quite make it in academia, they could go and try the trade. And if they do, we can introduce them to this young man. So at one level I was insulted.